So, Anjali, welcome to our podcast, Finding the Final Thing,
Thank you.
and appreciate your taking time out for this.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So, Kushal, I would like to think more of myself first as a channel of my gurus. More so from the time that autobiography of a yogi came into my life, um, everything turned around for me. My whole understanding of the world changed almost. It was like a 360-degree change in my understanding. So, when you especially are asking me about myself, I would like to say that I consider myself to be an instrument, to be a channel of my gurus, as a very humble servant. That's how I like to view myself. Now, if you ask me about, in terms of the the material plane aspect as to who I am, so I I'm a training professional. I've been associated with the corporate world since last 15 to 17 years now. Majorly, I'm into soft skills and behavioral skills training, and I conduct a lot of training programs for corporates on this. And that is primarily what I do professionally. Personally, I would say that I'm a very cheerful, very enthusiastic individual, and I love to go on adventures. I love to travel whenever I can. I like to sing a little bit. I like to sketch a little bit. I have learnt a little bit of ballroom dance forms. So those are the social life aspects that are there about me. But if I were to identify myself as an individual, I would just say that I'm an instrument of the gurus. Uh, I like to consider myself as a little child of the gurus. That's how I would describe myself.
Okay, interesting. So, tell us more about uh, how did you get to the autobiography of the yogi, and you talked about gurus and you talk about channel and instrument. So, tell us more about this aspect of your life.
So, this takes me back to my childhood. And since my childhood, I've been very interested in the paranormal stuff, in the stuff which supernatural phenomena, things like these mysteries that are around you. So, since my childhood, I've been very interested in all of this. And it so happened, and I used to have my own takes on, these phenomena. And I remember once that when I was, I think, in seventh or eighth standard, my mother, I, and my brother, we had gone to our unit temple. So my dad is a retired colonel, and he was serving at that time. And every regiment in the army has its own dharam sthan, and there is a temple and everything. So I remember my brother used to get very nervous during examinations. So my mother asked Pandit ji that आप ना इसको कुछ थोड़ा सा suggest करो. So then Pandit ji suggested to my brother that he should read the Hanuman Chalisa. So I have no clue whether he read it or not, but I started reading Hanuman Chalisa, and I started having my conversations with Hanumanji. And only till a few years ago, I told even my family members that I consider Hanumanji to be my elder brother. So, so these are the kind of things that I used to do when I was a child. And I remember I used to pray to Hanumanji for giving me a certain pass percentage. Nothing deeper. It was just a very casual conversation, with Hanumanji. And at that time, I did not have any understanding of gurus or, Sanatan Dharma or the Vedas or the Upanishads. But I do remember when I was in 11th standard, we had just had lunch, and I asked my father generally, I just asked him, I said, Dad, where do we go when we die? Okay. So my dad was a little taken aback. He wasn't expecting a question like this. And
From a teenager.
yes, from a teenager. I still remember that room, the dining room. Dad was posted in Jodhpur, and we
Yeah.
were there. And I asked him, and he was taken aback, and he says, "Beta, I don't know." So I said, "See, I'm not talking about the body. I am talking about this particular feeling that I know that this is me. Where does this me go when we die?" And again, my dad replied the same thing. He says, "I don't know." So even then, I think maybe I was not ready for the gurus to come to me at that point of time. So generally, like any other child, I did my graduation and my MBA, and then got into the corporate world. And autobiography entered my life when the time was right. So they say that you don't choose the guru. The guru comes to you when the time is right. Right? So once I was conducting training in one of the companies, and there were 4 or 5 people who were pulled off the operations floor because they had poor communication, English communication, and they were serving the US client. So there was a topic that I gave to them to practice their English after the initial inputs. And the topic was, again, paranormal activities that you've heard about. So what happened was, and I can never forget that particular trainee of mine. His name was Manoj. And he says, "Anjali, I don't know about paranormal activity, but I know I have a guru in Haridwar, and he has told me to read the book Autobiography of a Yogi." In Autobiography of a Yogi, there is a mention of many saints, who have powers, like just by the power of thought, they can control the environment and all of those things.
Right.
So I was enamored just by listening to this. The fact that you can actually control the environment just by thinking, So then I asked him, I said, "Tell me the name of the author," because I'm very much into reading.
Yeah.
So he didn't remember the name of the author, but he told me one thing. He says, "My guru has said that this is a very powerful book and you must read this book."
Right.
So then I was very determined to find the book and read it. And yes, then of course I found Autobiography of a Yogi in Om Bookshop in Gurgaon. And the moment I looked at his picture,
That was the first time you saw his picture.
yes, that was the first time I saw his picture. And the moment I looked at his picture, his eyes, his eyes are so captivating, so piercing. And till that time, so I just knew that I will take the book, of course. And after that, my whole, since I'm an avid reader, whenever I pick up a book, I will generally complete it. Okay? This particular book is very interesting. In fact, I suggest it to a lot of people. I say that even if you do not want to discover the higher truths of the universe, you read it just as a very thrilling read. It's a book which has so many amazing, out of the world, unbelievable stories that you can enjoy it fully, even as a good read. So when I was reading the book, I did not question anything that was there in the chapters, because it just kept getting absorbed in me. And I felt a very strong connect from inside with Paramahansa Yoganand, with Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahashay, and since then, that's how the book came into my life. It was very powerful, and at times I couldn't read it in one go, end to end, because I think even when you do not realize, the book has that power to, transform things in you, to shake things in you from inside subtly,
Yeah.
energy wise. I remember a couple of times I saw the book by my bedside table, and I looked into his eyes, and his gaze was so penetrating that couple of times I actually flipped it over. I said, I can't look at you.
Yeah.
Because I felt that he was seeing me through and through, and he just knew everything about me, you know. So till that time, I was an ordinary person of the world, an average human being, and I didn't know anything about energy and gurus and kundalini and yoga and all of those things. But I just knew that there was whatever is mentioned in the book is true. I never questioned it. And by the time I got to the end of the book, it took me 4-5 months, and it generally doesn't. So by the time I read the book, I knew that this was my lineage of gurus. And it is through that book that a lot of my transformation or further elevation has happened till date.
Right. Very interesting. So, after you read the book and you were a corporate trainer, so how did your day-to-day life start to change, or what kind of transformation you went through? Tell us more about that.
Okay, all right. So, as a corporate trainer, you connect a lot with people, right? So you're conducting training batches and you're connecting one-to-one with people, and it's always good to give an enhanced version of your own self as a trainer
Right.
to your participants.
Right.
So the most important way in which autobiography helped me was that first I was convinced that meditation is the permanent tool for transformation. That is something which I was convinced about. And after reading the book, I was very eager, and I had learnt the first level which Paramahansa Yogananda has specified, which is the Hong Sau technique of meditation.
Right.
And energization exercises. So I had learnt that, and I started practicing. Initially, it was 10 minutes of practice in the morning and in the night, at times at noon also. So I think I continued. Initially, everybody struggles with it, that you get a lot of thoughts during meditation and stuff, but I continued with it. So meditation as a tool came to me, and then it is such a powerful tool that if you use it, it enhances your overall energy, your feelings, your thought process. Everything gets uplifted. You become more and more expansive in your heart space. And so it helped me a lot with respect to my corporate training programs and my connect with people. And I was also able to then guide people in learning meditation and other things. So it's been very, very powerful.
Right. So, Anjali, you talked about some transformations, and transformations are a big change, right? It's you become something else, like the caterpillar becomes the butterfly.
Yes.
So, tell us some such transformation which happened in your life with the teachings of the gurus, and which you have experienced so far.
Oh, lots. I would say, I say this candidly, and I say it to everybody. I say whatever you see of me today, it's all because of my gurus. Whatever they've taught, whatever grace they have showered on me, everything that I am is because of them. So what happened was that I got to know after reading autobiography and doing meditation that seva is a very, very important aspect also. So although I had a very helpful nature since childhood, and I have seen my parents also do a lot of annadan, a lot of seva that way with respect to giving clothes and all of those things to the underprivileged of the society. But I got into seva actively after reading autobiography of a yogi, after getting into my meditation sessions, everything that I learnt, of what Yogananda ji has taught from the acharyas. And there I got to know that seva is also a very, very important tool for transformation. And the right bhav of seva, who did I learn it from? I learned it from Mohanji. You know, when I was, so first learning came from Swami Kriyananda, because I remember attending his satsangs, and he said that
This was which year?
this was 2012. 2012. So we can say 2009 to 2012. I attended a lot of satsangs of Swami Kriyananda. And every time in the satsang, or whenever he would hold a forum, he would always talk about the importance of not just your disciplined sadhana, which is meditation, but also seva. So that's when I realized that seva is a very integral tool of you as a human being
Yeah.
to enhance the way you live on earth.
Right.
You know. So that's when I got into it very specifically, as in conscious effort of doing seva. So my first effort was obviously wherever I can donate a little bit, because in our scriptures, in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, they say that you should do 10% of donation of your salary for good causes, right? So initial years in my career, I wasn't able to do 10%, but whatever little I could monetarily, that's what I did. Apart from that, I did a lot of seva in kind,
Right.
which essentially means that after a few years of doing meditation practice, I used to do seva as an acharya in Ananda Sangha, where I and another Guru Bhai, Brijesh, we used to conduct level 1 meditation sessions for new seekers on Saturdays and Sundays. So this was in DLF phase 1 and then DLF phase 2.
Right.
So there I got involved in doing seva like that. And whenever Swami Kriyananda's functions used to happen, we used to go and do seva. So I was very actively involved in the publications department. So I used to tell all my friends also. They also used to join for doing seva in that function. So did a lot of seva like that. And then I realized now the one thing that I learned from Swami Kriyananda about seva was that you should always do, in fact, not just seva, but he said you should do everything as a disciple. If you are looking at yourself as a disciple, then you should do all the seva that you do as a channel of the gurus, as a channel of the divine. And which essentially means that you remove your aham, your ahankar, your ego. Right? So this I learned from Swami Kriyananda. And in fact, there was one more important learning that I had from him, which transformed my corporate way of working also, was that whenever you are employed at any place, this that since I'm working, they are bound to pay me, right? So they are obliged to pay me. Okay, I'm working, so they are obliged to pay me, right? But Swami Kriyananda, in one of the satsangs, he said that you should do your work also in the spirit of seva, even though they are monetarily paying you. And in fact, he's written a book called The Art of Leadership, where he says that a leader, anybody who's a leader, should actually be flowing from the spirit and the consciousness of being a sevak, doing seva for others, who are working with him. So that actually hit a chord, because I used to think, I am entitled for salary because I'm working for the organization. So that also transformed me in my corporate career. And the second most important learning as far as seva came to me was listening to Mohanji. I had arranged a satsang for Mohanji, and we were all together. And Mohanji said, he says, whenever you're doing seva, like annadan, any dan that you're doing, or you're giving your time and energy for a particular project, you should actually be doing it from an attitude of being grateful that somebody else is accepting your seva. what happens whenever you do seva? If the other person is accepting your seva, that other person is enhancing the burning of your old bad karma. That because that person is accepting your money or the clothes or the food that you're giving or the time and energy that you're giving to, say, guide the other person,
Right.
because that other soul is accepting your seva,
Hmm.
that is helping in burning your old bad karma. So you should be always grateful. Do it with an attitude of gratitude. Otherwise, seva, Kushal, a lot of people think, "Arey, maine annadan kiya," or I donated 10,000 rupees for this, or I donated 25K here, there, and all of those things. Or people do it from that feeling, that space, that I'm the doer. But what I have learned from all the gurus through their teachings, through their satsangs, is that always put yourself aside, your ego aside, and be very grateful that you are being used as a channel to get the seva done. So it's a very, very powerful transformation for me that way. Seva as a tool.
Right.
Yes.
So this what you shared was somewhere around 2012-13 is what I.
Yeah, so 2014 was Mohanji's satsang,
Yeah.
which I heard, where
Yeah.
I got to know that you should be in a space of gratitude
Yeah.
when somebody is accepting your
Yeah.
seva,
Yeah.
instead of you feeling that, oh, acha, I am higher,
Yeah.
and the other person is here, so I
Yeah.
have more, so I am giving it to
Yeah.
the other person. That should never be the case.
Right.
So
right.
that was 2014.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I remember that I had met you in a cafe coffee day, and I spoke about lotus petal,
Yes.
and you were a bit reluctant, and then I told you that why don't you come and to this one room school we have in a shopping arcade, and after you came there, a lot of things changed. So tell us something about that experience.
Yes, absolutely, Kushal. Yes, you're right. The moment, so after meeting you, although I liked what you suggested and everything, but I was like, I don't know,
Yeah.
that kind of a feel was there. But it was so nice of you and so sweet of you that you invited me to come and see that one room initiative, where you had put in your heart and energy. The moment I came and I saw, the first thing that I saw was Paramhansa Yogananda ji's small little picture, there by the door. And the moment I saw that, everything changed completely, because I was like, okay, it is not Kushal, it is Yogananda ji, who has connected me to you. And once I conducted the session for the first batch, then I kind of, reached out to you, and I told you that now I know, why I have come here, or I've been called here, actually, not really come of my own accord. But, this is how the gurus work. By now, you and me, both of us know. But at that time also, since I was just a initial beginner in this particular lifetime, so yeah.
So how, like you said, that meditation, is a very powerful and the only permanent tool which is there for transformation. So tell us something more about it, and what's your experience been with children, with adults, and about teaching them meditation, and just tell us more about it.
So, my experience has been wonderful. In fact, I feel every time that I have tried to be a channel to guide somebody with meditation, to teach them the technique, I feel that the more I have put myself aside and let the guru's vibration flow through me, every time that has happened, it has kept on elevating my consciousness, or my way of being. It has been, so what happens is, when you are trying to train people in what the gurus have taught, if they are flowing through you, or they're, because you always invoke the presence of the gurus whenever you teach or guide somebody, so then the gurus, the vibration comes, the divine vibration is always present, but it becomes stronger whenever you are invoking the presence of the Sadgurus. So yes, it has been an extremely wonderful experience training others in this. and people who have practiced. So there's a very important thing. Anybody who is taught meditation should actually continuously practice it. There are a lot of people who let go of it in 15-20 days because they have multiple thoughts going on when they are supposed to actually be focusing on the technique or focus simply on the breath, you know. So if they leave things midway, obviously they can't feel the benefit. But I've had a lot of testimonials from people, students as well as grown-ups, that when they have continued with their meditation in the morning, in the night, or whenever they had time, 15 minutes also in a day, they themselves have felt a very strong sense of peace and calm coming as the first benefit that they have realized in their lives. So 1 month, 1.5 months into meditation, they have felt the most strong, feeling that they've felt is that of being at peace, being more calm, and being more clear in their thought process. Clarity in thought has come to people. A lot of people, once they have gone beyond a period of 2 months, then they have experienced a very strong level of heightened concentration, ability to focus more on whatever tasks they are doing, enhanced memory, okay, and very, very high levels of joy in their heart. Feeling joyful and cheerful without any reason. Generally, people feel happy when they've been given a hike in the salary, or you've bought a new car, or you've bought a new house, of anything that you were dreaming of, you were able to achieve that goal. So that's a reason to you being happy. Generally, this is how things work in this world. But when you meditate on a regular basis, you feel joyful without any reason. So that's another benefit that I've heard from the students as well as the grown-ups.
Right. So what have, like, you talked about that the gurus, they use you as a channel, or you see yourself as a channel and an instrument for the gurus. So why do the gurus need a channel? They can directly reach out to everyone.
Yes, absolutely. They can. In fact, they already are. But the problem with us humans is that we are not listening. We are not receptive. So that's a very good point, Kushal. So what happens is that, this is where people need to understand. The divine or the creator or the cosmic consciousness, it is present everywhere, every second, every moment, everywhere, all the time. Okay? So it's not this that, when I am having dinner, or I am listening to, say, somebody is listening to rock music, okay, and drinking and having dinner, at that time God is not there. It doesn't happen like that. The divine is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. This is what Yogananda ji said. And that is actually true. So the divine is present everywhere. The divine is present in you, in me, in every atom of the universe, and in every human being. Okay? Why do we need Sadgurus then? Okay? That is majorly because, the average human being really is not able to see what is the highest eternal truth. What is the highest purpose for the form and life of a human being? This is something which average humans are not aware of. So you see, this is there all around. The Earth planet is in a galaxy. It's a Rajasic galaxy, and the Earth planet itself is Rajasic in its major guna that is there. So most of the humans who are here, most of the souls who are incarnate here as humans, they fall under the veil of Maya. And Maya is all about, keeping you engrossed with the pleasures of the senses. So the senses of, feel, touch, taste, what you are looking at, what you're hearing, all of these things are the senses. And these are the senses which keep us so embroiled in our experiences, which Maya has created, and all the sensory pleasures that we get, that we actually do not, we are not able to align ourselves with the divinity that exists. In fact, the divinity is present all the time around us, every moment, but we are not tuned to it. Why? Because our outwardly five senses that we have, they cannot feel the presence of the very subtle, fine vibration of cosmic consciousness that exists, because these organs are limited. Okay, now I always tell people, experiment with meditation. When you hear people say such things, those are just words for you. Till the time you experiment with meditation, go on for a few months, you will automatically start getting your own experiences of whether there is really something called the divine consciousness, the divinity in me, the divinity in others, and all of that. So the right tool to touch base with the divinity is actually going inward, and through the spiritual eye, which is the Agnya Chakra. When one starts to do more of it, then one starts to feel the connect, and that's when you start realizing that everything is connected and the divine is present everywhere. Now, because the average human being is only seeing everything through the senses, so what happened? All the rishis and the munis, they started suggesting that we should create spiritual energy centers where people can at least start aligning their own thoughts, feelings, behavior to the highest ray of consciousness. So we used to have temples, the old temples, ancient temples of India, they're all created in such a way that everything is consecrated, with the invocation of the divine, doing the pran pratishtha and everything. And they would create they would give some form to the divine, so it could be in the form of Shiva or Devi Ma or Vishnuji, Radha Krishna, any. So they would give the form. So when they give the form and the invocation has been done and all of that, the whole space has been consecrated and that is the time when a normal average human being, if he or she visits that particular sacred space, outwardly through the senses, the person is able to relate to something. Okay, so it's only because of this, because the average human's experience is limited by their senses, and hence to solve that, temples were introduced. Okay, now why do the gurus come into the picture? I can have a direct connect with the divine, and that's how it should be, right?
Yeah.
That's how it should be. Why not? But the thing is, the Sadgurus, they play the same role that a map, or a teacher, or somebody who has, suppose you're going to a new destination, you've never been to that place, but there is another friend of yours who's already gone to that place, so that friend of yours can actually tell you, give you directions, stop here, take a break here, follow this road, go there would be another good sightseeing place there, so that friend would guide you towards that destination. So the Sadgurus who are there, or God takes the form of the Sadguru majorly to become a guide. Guide for a normal average human being, because normal average human being is going to use his or her senses, his or her intellect, his or her heart, because every human being is seeking the answer, whether they are aware about it today or they are not aware about it. Knowingly, unknowingly, everybody is trying to find a deeper meaning to life on earth. So you can only make so many millions, for 20 years, 30 years. You can only have so many cars. you can only do so many vacations. Even after doing all of that, there are many people who feel empty inside. And that void which they feel I have come to realize there is no other tool that can fill that void except your own inner connect, your own inward practice, which helps you align with the divine consciousness that exists in the universe. So, hence, you need gurus because they are guides.
So, a lot of people have this misconception, or they have this thought that getting into meditation and getting into a spiritual path would mean a very austere life, and they usually connect with the rishis and the yogis who live very isolated lives.
Yes.
So, is that a barrier to, or how do you break this barrier, or what's your thoughts on that? That people feel that if I get into meditation, then I will not be able to enjoy my life.
Yeah. Yes, that's a pretty generic thought process of average people, and there's no harm in thinking that way. Obviously, till the time people don't get to know what's the truth, they wouldn't think otherwise. So that's not the case actually. There are a lot of Sadgurus, saints in our Sanatan Dharma. If you read these scriptures also, there are a lot of Rishi Munis who were Grihasts, who had their family and everything. The only difference between those Grihasts, those householders, and today's average householders was that the Rishis and the Munis, they had a very strong inward disciplined practice sadhana which was going on in the morning, in the night, or in the noon, whatever time zones they had fixed for themselves. And when they used to come out of meditation, they used to go about taking care of their wives, their children as well. That is how, if you see, you must have heard a term called gotras. So the gotra is nothing but which rishi's lineage you are a part of. You have descended. So, for example, our gotra is Etre. So we are descendants of Etre Rishi. So when you talk about Bharadwaj Gotra, so they are descendants of Bharadwaj Rishi. So it has never been this that you only have to lead an outwardly austere life.
Right.
So this is something which every human being can practice. It's not going to take you to a jungle, isolated. You're not going to become a hermit. You can actually create your own strong meditation gufa or meditation space in your own room, your personal room in the most posh metropolitan city where you're staying.
Yeah.
So one need not go to the cave and meditate. One need not go to the Himalayas and become a sadhu just because you have started meditating. No, you can actually have your own experiences of the divine while leading the life of a householder. And this is nowhere mentioned by the gurus or in the scriptures that you have to let go of all your responsibilities and just become a sadhu, an ascetic, go to the forest and become a hermit. It's not there. In fact, a lot of the Sadgurus, they themselves are householders. So Lahiri Mahasaya was a householder. Swami Sri Yukteswar was a householder. When his wife passed away and his daughter was married, then he took the Swami renunciation vows. And even today, you look at Mohanji, or you look at Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev, you can look at a lot of saints who are householders. So I think this is a good enough example for people to realize. In fact, Lahiri Mahasaya, that reminds me, in one of his previous incarnations, he was Raja Janak. Raja Janak, father of Sita ji. So Raja Janak was considered a Raj Rishi by the saints at that time. They knew what his elevated status was. Outwardly, he was a Raja. He was the ruler of a kingdom. He was surrounded by so much of jewelry, so much of gems, so much of wealth. But inwardly, he was a very high level renunciate. And he was called a Raj Rishi. And Raja Janak had this very beautiful balance of how to manage his kingdom, the praja, and his own sadhana. And he was a realized master in that incarnation itself. So Lahiri Mashe, previously one of the previous incarnations of his was Raja Janak. So imagine now what more materialistic you will be than more than a Raja. So he was into sadhana, meditation, and everything.
So, is it that this whole practice of meditation and seeking fulfillment, salvation, whatever you call it, is it something which is confined to people who are already at a certain level of economic upliftment? What about somebody living in the slums who is struggling for his day-to-day livelihood? Does spirituality not reach him, or because we don't hear about it, or so? What's your perspective on that?
Oh, I feel spirituality, inward practice of meditation, it is meant for every human being. It has nothing to do with what strata of society you come from. So let's take the example of Sudama ji. Sudama ji, he was one of the friends of Lord Krishna, but he used to be a very, very he was from a very underprivileged level of society, right? He couldn't even feed. At times he couldn't feed his family, during the day also. So, but that being that's a separate example. But what I want to say is, as I've already said, that the divine is present everywhere, every moment. So the divine is present everywhere, every moment, even for an upper class person as well as somebody who's from the lower strata of society. It is only your own heart's receptivity and openness to wanting to experience the divine that will lead you to wanting to know about meditation and practicing meditation. So it's got nothing to do with you having money or not having money. Yes, what does happen is, because people don't have money to fulfill the basic necessities of life, their intellect or the higher realms of their intellect does not take them towards questioning the higher purpose of human life. They don't start to seek. Why don't they start to seek? Because they are so busy with fulfilling the basic requirements of daily life. 3 meals a day, you need a little shelter on your head and all of that. So I feel that could be the reason why you don't hear a lot of people talk about this from the lower strata of society. But let me tell you, we should not even think that this happens, because a lot of people who are from the lower strata of society, without any rhyme or reason, they have a lot of faith in the divine. Even though they are struggling with a lot of material problems in their daily life, but at times, if you just talk to those people, they would just have this innate faith in the divine. Whether they are doing it through an outward ritual or whether they are visiting a temple, the faith in them is somehow very strong. And now that same faithful person, if he or she takes up the inward practice of meditation, can actually get a very strong experience of the divine. Now coming back to Sudama ji. So Sudama ji was such a dear friend of Krishna, and yet he never thought about asking Krishna for material prosperity. It never struck him that he should ask Krishna, because Krishna had everything. Why did it not strike him? Because I think in one way he was not just a friend, but he was such a loving devotee of the divine that I think he had become very satiated and contented for the fact that he was blessed enough to have the friendship of the divine. That's how I would look at it. Till the time his wife reminded him that you go and ask Krishna for some, material wealth. It never struck him that he should actually be asking all of this because God himself has become his friend. So I think inwardly he must have been very, very rich. He must have been very wealthy inwardly. And that's why, he didn't reach out on his own to Krishna for external, outwardly riches.
So Anjali, you shared that in 2013 you walked into that one-room school, and you saw Paramahansa Yogananda ji's picture, and you knew that he had got you here. And it's been like more than 10 years now, and you are in this new campus, and you're still teaching children about meditation, about teaching teachers about meditation, about using energy to work with. How do you feel, and how would you describe this decade of seeing Lotus Petal, being inside, being outside, looking at it from the periphery? How do you feel? How would you describe it?
Oh, I feel so blessed to see that, it has grown multiple fold, and so many lives, so many lives of children have benefited from this initiative of yours, Kushal. Lotus Petal that you had started at that point of time. The way it has grown, enormous. And I think that enormous growth has come only because you have done it from the bhav of being an instrument, not an egoistic human being.
Yeah.
That is why in just a period of 10 years, I see that from that one batch of 15 to 17 students, now we have almost 2,000 plus students.
Yeah.
So I am so elated and I'm so blessed to witness this particular growth.
Yeah.
And all kudos to you and your team, your staff. They've all done this service in a selfless manner. That's the only way you can get that kind of grace and blessing of the divine.
Right.
So beautiful. I mean, I am so impressed.
So this work, of all the children who come for education at Lotus Petal, they are coming from economically weaker sections and an underserved section of society. And at a very early age, they are learning about meditation, they're learning to work with energy. So how do you think this will impact over a period of time as they grow into adults? What kind of benefits would these children get from this?
Oh, the benefits would be immense, they would be a lot. So the fact that we are teaching the children, right from the beginning, they're like soft clay as of now, and when you're molding the clay, the way you mold it, that's how the output will be, right? And I know for a fact that your vision, of course, in Lotus Petal is to transform all the individuals who come here to their best versions of themselves. That's what I know by now, that this is your aim, which you may not be saying outwardly, and I don't think many people even know that about you.
Right.
Okay. So the fact that as a visionary, as a leader, you have this vision inside your heart for every soul who comes to Lotus Petal. Not just the students who are signing up, but all the employees, all the staff, everybody across functions. You as the visionary have that particular visualization for your people. Because you have that visualization, let's talk about students, when we start early with them as far as meditation is concerned, there are going to be immense benefits. As I said, anybody who starts meditation and is regular with meditation will find himself or herself augmenting all the positive qualities that they have.
Right.
Okay? So, if you were a 50 at helping people, if you become a continued meditation practitioner, you will, after a few months or a few years, you will become a 90 out of 100 in helping people. If you already have a good quality, that quality will get enhanced. And if you do not have a certain good quality, then that certain good quality will also start getting cultivated in your personality.
Right.
Okay? Apart from that, the usual benefits, when you work with energy, when you do an inward practice, The students will have enhanced immunity.
Yeah.
Okay, they will have high levels of concentration and focus. And in today's world, where there is so much of screen time, where students are losing their attention, right?
Yeah.
So, using meditation is a beautiful tool, specifically to get the benefit of higher levels of focus and concentration. Meditation would also help the students with enhanced memory,
Yeah.
strong memory power. Okay, it gives you and everybody else who practices the clarity of thought. Yeah, it calms you. So if a student or a child is emotionally, because they come from backgrounds which may have some conflict at home,
Yeah.
if the students are witnessing those kind of conflicts, then when they practice meditation, it can bring about a lot of calmness in the student. Their anxiety levels can go down. All these cases that you hear about depression and all of that, I feel it's all because people are not using a strong tool which is available for free.
Yeah.
And that tool is the tool of meditation. So no depression, nothing will happen. The students will have enhanced levels of energy and enthusiasm. They'll be cheerful all the time. And what else? Tremendous sharpening of your skill set happens. Okay, so whatever talent you're carrying inside, wherever you continuously meditate over a period of number of years or even months, whatever skill set you're carrying, that entire skill set will increase in its performance. Okay, apart from that, a lot of harmony happens inside your own heart, so you end up having a lot of harmony with people around you. Interpersonal skills improve, interpersonal relationships improve, and you feel joyful without any reason. And if you're joyful, energetic, enthusiastic, confident all the time, you're able to concentrate better, your memory is enhanced, every other skill that you have is sharpened, good qualities of yours get sharpened even more.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a certain good quality, that also gets cultivated in you through a regular practice of meditation. These are some of the benefits, and apart from that, there is something which is an inward subtle transformation which will happen within your being, which you won't even realize. And over a period of time, if we've started with a student who's in class 1 and he continues practicing that in the school, which at Lotus Petal we are all doing. So before they start their academic classes, this happens. So imagine a student who has been practicing this for 10 years, class 1 to class 10 to class 12. Imagine the upliftment in his consciousness that would come, and the kind of immensely positive, very productive, constructive individual that student would become by the time he passes his 12th and he goes into the society to contribute as a human. So he would be such a positive and a valued asset to the society in general. So I think it's immense. It's going to be immensely beneficial for the students if they continue to practice, and so for the teachers and everybody else.
So Anjali, you talked about the question which you had asked your father, that after we die, where do we go? So have you found an answer to that question? With all these years of spiritual practice.
Once I leave the body. So I will get to know that with experience, I think, when I leave the body. But no, let me just tell you what I know till now. So what I know is through what the gurus have taught. Okay, so I consider the gurus' teachings to be the essence of what the scriptures say. So while I have not read the detailed Vedas, but I have my Sadgurus with me as my Veda and Upanishads.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So my gurus, Babaji, Paramhansa Yogananda, Lahiri Mahasaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar Ji, Anand Mahima. So they, whatever they have guided, that's what I've got to know. That essentially, when you leave the body, it all depends how you have led your life on the earthly plane. Okay, so if you have been practicing yogi, wanting to become one with God, wanting to become one with the divine, or realizing your own highest potential of being a divine being, okay, then what happens is the gurus, what the gurus say is that they come to receive you when you are leaving the body. So as a practicing yogi, you consciously leave the body. So the gurus say that whenever you would leave a body as a disciple, as a devotee, okay, Paramahansa Yogananda ji has promised this. He says, I or any of the other gurus will be there to receive you. Okay? And how it... So I am very confident that, they will be there to receive me. So essentially, what happens is, Swami Sri Yukteswar has explained it in the autobiography of a yogi, wherein he says that generally when we leave the body as an average human being, so based on whatever good karma we've done, there is a certain time period which we spend in the astral plane. Okay? And after spending that time in the astral plane, if our soul had desires, earthly desires which can only be fulfilled on earth planets, then those desires, after the expiration of our good karma that we had done and our soul is in the astral plane, once that duration gets over, then the soul incarnates on earth again to fulfill the desires that the soul had. So that is the cycle of life and birth, which continues again and again and again. And the same cycle happens where we are born, we grow up as children, we achieve our teenage years, and then we go to the college, then we start earning. After our work life, we get married, then we have kids, then the kids get married and we become old, and then again we die. So this whole cycle will continue. After dying, again, the soul will go back to the astral plane. You still have desires of earth.
So it will continue till what point?
Till the time God's grace descends on you and, God says, okay, fine, let moksha be granted to you. And that actually is dependent on the soul's own yearning. So if the soul has that really strong desire, then for sure, you will have the advent of Sadgurus in your life. They will share with you the techniques which you can use. And if you keep practicing again and again with a lot of sincerity and love and devotion, that is very, very important. So love and devotion for the divine, for the absolute one, is a very mandatory requirement before you become one with the divine. So yes, so if we follow that practice which our gurus have taught with a lot of love and devotion, then for sure God's grace can descend at any point of time. Even though you may not have meditated for the last 30 years, but all of a sudden you got this strong desire to merge back into the absolute. God's grace can do a lot of things. Paramahansa Yogananda used to say that 25% is the disciple's effort, 25% is the guru's effort on the disciple's behalf, and rest 50% is all grace of God.
So, if I were to ask you, Anjali, what is your life purpose?
Okay, so my life purpose is very simple. Actually, there are two things which have come to my mind. So I was actually contemplating whether I should share the first one with you or not.
Please share.
Because it's a very, childish one. I mean, if somebody hears, that's what, somebody would think. But I will share it with you. So, my purpose is, so this is my internal dialogue that I had with Bhagwanji, with God. So I tell him, I want you to be very proud of me. I want you to be very proud of me as a divine father or as a divine mother. That you created me. You know, you allowed me to get separated from you, and then after you sent me out, you know, and then I want you to feel very proud of me. I mean, that's what I want to make the creator feel proud. That's like a kiddish thing, like you do it for your parents. That is one thing. So that is there. But yeah, my life purpose for sure is um, if God is kind, and He gives me that grace, I would want to merge. I want to, that's my desire. My purpose also is merging back into the divine consciousness. And everything that I do in the practical material realm, which is either meditation or doing seva, these are all tools of I purifying myself so much that I'm able to merge back in the divine.
So
That's my purpose.
Right. So would you say that merging back into the divine is for you finding the final thing?
Yes, for me, this is finding the final thing. Yes, you've aptly said it.
So thank you, Anjali, for your time and sharing all your insights from your life experiences. It has been an absolutely engaging and very humbling and inspiring conversation with you.
Thank you very much. I am very humbled to be in your presence. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.